You're listening to a podcast of spurious morality.
Hello and welcome to a podcast of spurious morality. I'm Johnston, and with me this week I have Will. Hello.
Hello there.
And we are doing the third series of Eighth Doctor Adventures, so we've previously discussed every single episode in Series 1 and Series 2. You can find those in our history of podcast episodes, but this is the third series now, which... Bit of a twist on this one, because you'd not heard this one before, had you?
No, that's right, yeah, because the first two, they were re-listens. In the case of Series 1, re-listens from many years ago, but I had heard it before. Where I was going into this series, completely blind, wasn't sure exactly. In a bit of a strange situation, because I have heard most of Series 4. In fact, those were the ones I heard first. But yes, it was very interesting to go in sort of the first time listening to these.
So it's going to be quite interesting just sort of getting that slightly different perspective on these, I think, then, because I have to admit, I think this is I'm not going to say it's the forgettable series of the four. That's not fair. There's some really good stuff in here. But I think it perhaps doesn't have the punch that everything else had. Like, Series 1 was this brave new series. It was the Eighth Doctor goes New Who, and they were going for the big guest stars, and it was on the radio, and it was all a bit of a novelty. I think Series 2 kind of took the work that Series 1 had done and built on it, and maybe started to tell a slightly different style of story. I think there's, as we discussed last time, there's more of a confidence with Series 2. It feels like they've kind of decided what it is they want to do, what this New Who style Big Finish is going to be. I think this series just kind of settles into it a little bit too much. I think some of the stories are maybe a little bit more trad. I mean, not all of them. Some of them are flipping weird, to be honest. But I think this is the series that sort of does the least in terms of things to make it memorable or different from a lot of other stuff or exciting, that kind of thing. Not that I am down on this series. I do not dislike this series. I do not think it's a bad series. I just think that it's perhaps not got the edge that the other three do. And maybe by the time we've discussed all of these, I'll discover that I think everything I've just said is entirely wrong, but we'll see. So one thing that we kind of discussed last time was how the Headhunter didn't really have much of an impact in terms of the second series. She popped up in Grand Theft Cosmos to kind of remind the audience that she existed, and then she turned up to deliver one of the finales, or one of the cliffhangers, I should say, at the end of the Morbius episode. But she's certainly more heavily involved this time. She's not in it loads and loads again. She's certainly not in it like she was in the first series, where she pops up in more or less every episode. But I think the Headhunter is a more important character here, and that's sort of one thing going into the first episode, Orbis. You kind of expect, because of the nature of how Vengeance of Morbius ended, with sort of the Headhunter turning up on Lucy Miller's doorstep and shooting her, you'd be kind of weirded out if the Headhunter wasn't here. But she's got a lot more to do this time, and that's good. So let's talk Orbis. So we left the sort of situation with the Doctor was presumed dead. The Time Lords had basically dumped Lucy at home. Then the headhunter turned up and shot her. Unsurprisingly, the series starts with a reprise of that, and we then sort of go into a different weird and wonderful adventure that kind of resolves both those cliffhangers pretty quickly. So, talk to us about Orbis, and also talk to us, Will, about whether you think it is an effective resolution to that cliffhanger or those cliffhangers.
Okay, yes. So I found August to be quite a bold story to start off with. First of all, just slightly on your point that you were talking about the whole series, I think there are some things you said that I do agree with. One thing I would say is I think this series is trying to go for a bit of a darker tone and aesthetic and featuring a more distant Doctor. And of course, Orbis is really laying that out. It's the story that says we're going to make some changes here and we're going to do some different things. And I think it does do that some occasionally quite strikingly as well. Um, I like seeing the Headhunter. It's a character that I've enjoyed from this series, and so it was nice to get, as you said, we got a couple of Headhunter stories last time. Here we still only get a couple, but they're very sort of important um, showings from the Headhunter, and I think I always like seeing that character, and I think she's very good in Orbis. Um, this is certainly quite a strange story. Obviously, we get the sort of the bait and switch of we get the Doctor back, but it's actually for him been 600 years, and he's been busy living with a group of jellyfish people, and we get like their own jellyfish companion and things like that. The comedy mollusks, the molluscari, I'm not sure quite fit the rest of the story. I think it was an attempt to add a bit more levity to what is quite a dour story at times. But I personally probably would have just kept it dour. I think it maybe doesn't help that I think the two main molluscari are called Cassistria and Sacastria, which makes it almost impossible to remember which is which as you're listening to it. And overall, yeah, I enjoyed this one. It's very rare to hear a story where the Doctor actually full on loses, and I think it's fair to say that that is what happens here. And it's kind of his fault. Like they do say, it would have happened anyway, or the headhunter was making certain things happen and things like that. But he really does just basically let off a massive explosion and kills everyone. We did do Daleks Victorious on one of our previous reviews, and that does feature, the Doctor being defeated, but that sort of he loses the battle but wins the war. Whereas here, he just loses, and it's still quite a striking thing to hear, all this time later. Um, if there's one thing I guess that could be said is that you risk with this change of tone the fact that you do have to go back to doing Doctor Who, because we talked about previously Curiosity Shop, which has obviously they wanted to make a bit of a darker tone. In that case, it was Alfie Shaw and James Goss, wasn't it? They wanted to make a bit of a darker tone, but they ended up going so down a dark direction that it wouldn't have really fit with the Christmas special they had afterwards, and they had to add a new episode in. Here we have a situation where the Doctor accidentally destroys the planet that's been his home for 600 years and opts to die with them, only to then be shot by his companion and sort of dragged into the TARDIS, and he's like completely separated from his feelings towards Earth and his feelings towards humans and things like that. And we do still have to move on to Crinoids at the Eden Project, and now that's not. We'll get to Hothouse in a second, and it's that's not like a romp certainly, but there is still perhaps a little bit of a, a, a divide there, I suppose. That being said, I did like that. I did wonder, having heard Orbis, would they keep this more distant Doctor throughout? And I actually think they do. You do feel it in Paul McGann's performance for the rest of this series, that there is that time there on Orbis, and it does come up a few times. So I'd like that strand was kept through the whole series. And yeah, so yeah, overall, I think slightly rambly review perhaps, but I think that it managed to really set out what they wanted to do for this series quite well, and does it in quite a striking way.
See, I couldn't tell you exactly when I first heard Orbis. Now, I know for a fact that the first and second series I heard more or less the time they were released. Whereas I seem to think there was quite a big gap between me then hearing the third and fourth series. I think I'd switched off Big Finish for a couple of years, that sort of thing. Never really sort of have carried on with it. I don't know why. I couldn't possibly tell you why. But yeah, it was a few, probably a good 2 or 3 years, maybe more, before I heard Orbis um, after hearing Vengeance of Morbius. So that cliffhanger stuck with me for a long time. And I thought Vengeance of Morbius was fantastic, which makes it even more ridiculous that I didn't sort of pick it up straight away. Like I say, no idea what went on. And I kind of felt that when I got to Orbis, it wasn't the resolution to that cliffhanger that I wanted. However, it was a good resolution to that cliffhanger. Like, it did change the dynamic between the Doctor and Lucy. As you say, it did sort of change the Doctor, and the way McGann plays the Doctor in this series is subtly different. I think it's easy to forget at times. I do think that there are points where what happened between Morbius and Orbis is kind of paid lip service, but it's not really sort of explored in depth. And I don't feel as though as a storyline it does ever really reach any kind of conclusion. I think it just fizzles out because what happens in the fourth series sort of requires the Doctor and Lucy to be back to normal in Death in Blackpool.
Yeah,
Um,
there is one point
yeah,
I will bring up in when we're talking about a later episode where I think they could have lent a bit more on what happens in Orbis, and they didn't. But I'll get to that when we get to that particular story.
but certainly as a setup for a series, as a premise for a series, it's a really good idea. And as I've already said, I think they had to do something to try and make this series, I guess, give this series its own identity after 1 and 2, which do very much have their own, and 4 kind of manages to pull back having its own identity as well. And we'll talk about it more as we go on, but ultimately, what I'm saying is, I really didn't expect it to go the way that Orbis does. I think actually it's a pretty good way to go. I think it works. I don't think Orbis is the best story ever, but I think that it sort of sets us up nicely for another sort of really good series and just gives us a bit more of an interesting dynamic between the two characters of the Doctor and Lucy. Um, but yeah, ultimately, it does what it needs to do. It kicks off the series. You're right; it is bold. It's not where we were expecting it to go, but it's probably where it did need to go. So yeah, Orbis, I will chalk down as a winner. Um, And then we go to Hot House. Hot House is number 2. And I like the fact that it did sort of start with the second series, but it's kind of more noticeable in this third one, I suppose. Leaning into bringing back classic Doctor Who villains. Like, first series did Daleks and Cybermen, fine, they're out of the way. So now we can start exploring Crinoids and Wirren and things like that. And I'm glad it does. I think that it's Hot House is an interesting take on the Seeds of Doom. It's not just copy and paste. It's essentially what if this had have happened 30, 40 years in the future. And it's quite a futuristic story. There are a lot of callbacks to Seeds of Doom. Like, haven't we got? Is it Sir Colin's, some relation of Sir Colin in it? Am I misremembering here or?
Oh, we might do. Um,
Yeah, there's certainly references to either Sir Colin or Dunbar or something or someone um, from the Seeds of Doom. There's certainly, or is it? That's it. There's definitely a character that works for the World Ecology Bureau.
Yes,
Maybe I've
there is.
completely made up the familial link there. Ignore that part then. But it's yeah, there's definitely a link back. It is very much a sequel to the Seeds of Doom, and I think it does that quite well. But it does it differently, and I like the way it works. It kind of plays a little bit more into the body horror, which I think with Crinoids you really have to do. I honestly don't think Seeds of Doom did go far enough with the body horror element of it. I don't think it was allowed to because it was tea time 1970s television. Whereas this was allowed to sort of go a little bit further, and Big Finish has done Crinoids going a little bit further, even more since. In terms of what happens in Orbis, though, there's not an awful lot going on here. Like, we're dropped into the adventure, things are happening, Lucy's undercover, the Doctor's already working with the World Ecology Bureau. It's This is a very fast-paced episode, but it's a very fast-paced episode that it's actually quite long. Like, I sort of listen to it and kind of think, oh, the cliffhanger's got to turn up any minute, and I still have 10 minutes left on part one, that kind of thing. But yeah, it jumps in, it moves pretty quickly, and I think we could probably have done with a scene at the start that just kind of, had its, well, hang on, let's just discuss what happened in Orbis. Let's just have that moment where we properly refresh. There's a line in there, there's definitely something from Lucy about not really knowing the Doctor anymore, that kind of thing, but it doesn't continue the storyline in the way that I expected it to. It just kind of says, "Oh yeah, Orbis happened, but we're doing Crinoids now, so carry on." Do you feel the same? What do you think about this one?
Yeah, so the first thing I wanted to mention is because this, I guess this was a new thing about the series that we didn't talk about. You mentioned the run up to the cliffhanger of part one. These are two-parters now, which I
Yes.
had, as I said, listened to series four and completely forgot that they were two-parters. I was listening to them on the radio where they played them one after the other, and so yeah, that was like a new thing for me when the cliffhanger hit. But I wonder if these were originally written as hour-long episodes because they are now an hour as well, not 50 minutes. That's another thing that they would keep for the Eighth Doctor Adventures. I There are times when I thought this has clearly been written to be two parts, and there are other times when I thought they've done the season 22 thing where they found like the most tense bit that happens to be near the middle and said that that's the cliffhanger. So yeah, I do wonder. It'd be interesting to hear. Was it always the plan, or was it something that they added in later or not? But I'm going to go aside from that digression on to Hot House. I liked this story. I do agree with you about the Orbis stuff in the sense of I think they discuss it right at the end, which it was nice because I was worried they weren't going to mention it at all. It was nice to hear something, but maybe putting it in a bit more through the story would have been a slightly nicer thing for this sort of this arc and this series. That being said, we do still get a more distant Eighth Doctor here, both in terms of his attitude towards humans and his attitude towards Lucy is a little bit more distant. So Paul McGann's clearly sort of got the memo on it. So that is nice to hear. Um, this is a surprisingly, well, I don't know if it's surprisingly, this is a notably sort of quite downbeat episode. Around the time on TV that this was coming out, we were getting things like the Waters of Mars, which says things were bad, um, environmental wise, but then we worked together and we got through it. A more hopeful response. Whereas here, Johnny Morris is really talking about environmental disaster, and it's a really quite a downbeat approach to it. Well, from 2009, and as we are in a very much a lot more talk about climate crises and things like this now. It's quite interesting to hear the voices like that back in 2009. One thing that you have touched on is obviously there's a lot of sort of nods back to Seeds of Doom, a story that I really love, Seeds of Doom, and the main thing is of course that was based a lot. in horror. It was a horror story. It was from very much the Hammer horror era of Doctor Who, and this in turn is very much a horror story as well. The body horror, as you mentioned, we get to hear a lot of Big Finish's very good sort of body horror noises that they make as people are taken over by plants and things like this. And it does really create quite a tense atmosphere at times. I find myself enjoying this story a fair bit, and I do think perhaps from what I recall the ending was slightly rushed, but apart from that I enjoyed the sort of the atmosphere and the feel of this story, which was yeah, that was quite just I just enjoyed listening to it. I think another point I would make is that obviously, so we've got a Johnny Morris doing episode two, both in series two and in series three, and in a way they sort of reflect the series that each of their series, because in series two we get Grand Theft Cosmos, which is very much sort of it has quite a rompy feel. Obviously, it's got this parody of Top Gear going on and things like this, which fits
Max
the sort of
Warp.
oh,
I
Max
get 'em
Warp. You're
mixed up as
absolutely right.
well. I think we said this last time, didn't we?
Yeah, I was thinking in my head then. I just said something wrong? Yeah, Max Warp, of course. Not the other rompy series two story. So I think that Max Warp really fits the sort of the swashbuckling feel of series two, whereas for series three, which is trying to be a bit darker, we get Hot House, which I think is sort of emblematic of that series, where it's you've got a lot of these horror elements and it's a bit more dour and things like that. And yeah, I just thought that was an interesting thing. Johnny Morris is something of a tone setter, I guess, for this the series going forward.
I think that what is it? Is it Dead London in series two, the first one?
Yeah, yeah.
Something London anyway. Dead London. I think Dead London and Orbis are very, very much both designed to be series openers. They do very different things. Dead London's kind of it is a little bit more tone setting. It's a little bit more just reintroducing us to the Doctor Lucy with the storyline stuff from series one kind of lifted, whereas Orbis is very much setting up a series arc. But they're introductory episodes to what's going on. Whereas Max Warp and this, you're absolutely right. They're the tone setters. They're the ones that actually turn around and go, this is the kind of thing you're going to be listening to for the next 6 months. I agree with you. Before we move on, I am just going to sort of do the guest actor of the episode shout out for Nigel Planer, who's Alex Marlowe, and I like Big Finish using Nigel Planer. I think he's one of those that doesn't pop up too often, but whenever he does, they seem to have a really good role for him, and he sort of really gets stuck into it, and he sort of plays the sort of 2009 version, slightly beyond 2009, isn't it? Version of Harrison Chase very, very well. I'd like that character, and I like the casting there. It's well done. Shall we move on?
Oh yes, let's.
Well, let's go to Germany for the Black Forest and the Beast of Orlok, and this one has. In fact, I'm going to jump straight back in with guest star of the episode. It's got Samuel Barnett in it, and I think this might be Samuel Barnett's first one with Big Finish. Obviously, has gone on to be Norton Folgate in Torchwood, and I'm a big fan of the Netflix Dirk Gently series as well, which he and Elijah Wood were in. So I think, I could be wrong, but I think this is Samuel Barnett's first Big Finish, and it's just so good to hear him in it. We're not messing about with the guest cast here because we've got Miriam Margolyes as well, and obviously Miriam Margolyes and Doctor Who should go together an awful lot. I'm glad she's made it onto a TV episode since. Obviously, she was the Meep, wasn't she?
She was. Yeah. Beat the Meep.
She was indeed.
Oh no, she
Um,
wasn't Beep, was she? They
she was
renamed
just
the
the
Meep.
Meep. She was the
She
definitive
is,
article.
yeah, she is the
Yes,
Beep of all Meeps, but she is not Beep the Meep, which was a
she is.
interesting choice.
Yes, an important distinction.
Yes.
So this one this is a bit trad, isn't it? Which I'm not saying that in a derivative way, but this is possibly the most sort of trad Doctor Who we have in this series so far. I'm certainly struggling to think of anything else that has kind of just not gone through the motions because that sounds negative, but has just been a Doctor Who story in the way that this one does. I guess we've got the Germany settings, which does kind of spice things up a bit. At least it's not in the home counties, but yeah, this one is your sort of classic medieval folklore beast wandering the woodsy 19th century peasantsy kind of thing. It's there's nothing here we've not seen or heard or done before, is there? Um, and that's kind of in many ways this one stands out to me as perhaps the most trad Eighth Doctor adventure there is. Um, so yeah, it's not a bad story. It's just a Doctor Who story that happens, I guess, elevated by a pretty good guest cast. What do you think?
Yeah, so we get a gothic tale here. I think generally I'd mostly agree with you. This is quite a trad story. Shout out to you mentioned the guest cast. I like that Miriam Margolyes' character is called Frau Todd, which I believe in German translates to Mrs. Death, which is very very fitting for the story. Yeah, this does have a sparkling cast, as you said. It has this sort of it continues the feel that the series is going for. I did find myself, I think I'd probably place this of the eight from this series probably as the weakest one, sadly. I think it just there are some various twists and turns throughout, but it didn't quite hold my attention always. There is a bit we get our cliffhanger halfway through, which I believe is it Baron Teufel who is the suspected Beast of Orlok, and the doctor's trying to find out about him, and then the character says like, "I'm not Baron Teufel. I'm actually General Zoff of the Universal Malefactorium or whatever it is." And the only response I can really come up with is, "All right." Like we it kind of comes out of nowhere, and I had to just it was just like this. That's just words. But I do, yeah, overall find that it does have a sort of a nice sort of gothic feel. I do like some of me gothic literature that it pulls from, and it pulls from some nice ideas as well. We've got this whole thing of the golem, and which is actually a figure that we you don't actually hear that about that much in Doctor Who. There's the mythology of the golem and things like that, and so that leads to some nice areas to explore. But overall, I would have to say that the story didn't quite grab me, sadly.
Yeah, I think it ultimately, like I say, it does a Doctor Who story. I think it does it competently. I don't think it's bad. I've no real complaints about it. I have to admit, I do like the sort of revelation about Black Forest Gatto at the end. That's
Yeah, that's
sort of
true.
just
Actually, that is a nice.
it's a
Yeah,
lovely bit of randomness that you'd only get in Doctor Who, and it kind of it is one of those moments.
we do also get, actually. That's one extra point. We get a at the beginning, our cold open, as it were, is we get Nick Briggs giving a role, and I always feel a bit bad sometimes when, because I think Nick Briggs is actually a very good voice actor, but he's so ever present that I do every time he does a role, I am like, that's Nick Briggs there, as opposed to sometimes that's whichever character he's actually playing, which is not Briggs's fault. I think it's just the case that he's been in so many at this point that I end up just being like, it's Nicholas Briggs.
Yeah, I think he's a cracking vocal performer, but I think he does have quite a distinctive voice. And when he's not doing Dalek, Cybermen, Jadoom, whatever, I think he's got quite a recognisable voice. So you do kind of go, there's Nick. And it doesn't take me out the story. That would be overly dramatic to say, but you do sort of have that moment where you do sort of step away from the drama and go, "Oh, it's Nick." I guess, but yeah, it's worth having him there as the character and from the first scene to also have him there as the Daleks and the Cybermen and everything else as well. I think.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, like overall, it's not a bad episode. I think that any episode that just happens to be sort of normal throughout these series, it does. I feel as though I am, or maybe we are, being a little bit harsh on it purely because normal doesn't quite cut it in these series. Because a lot of what we're listening to and discussing here is excellent. Should we move on? Should we go to Wirren Dawn?
Yes, I've given you a lovely segue there. Speaking of Nicholas Briggs, we have Nicholas Briggs, We're in Dawn.
Yes, it is one that he wrote, and it's a very good one that he wrote. So this is very different to the previous encounter we've had with the Werin. This is very, very different to Ark in Space. This is, it's a big war epic, isn't it? It's a big war epic that kind of explores the Wirren a hell of a lot more because Ark in Space does quite a good job of that. Robert Holmes did like his sort of his alien species to have backgrounds, and there's a lot of stuff peppered through there that's hinted at, but we don't really see how the Wirren function, I guess, at large. Like, we've got a few desperate survivors on Nerva. We've not got the full-scale war that this is. Another one where it's worth talking about the guest cast. We've got Colin Salmon, who's sort of one of those fantastic British actors that it's always a pleasure when he turns up. And we've got Daniel Anthony off of the Sarah Jane Adventures. It's Clyde Langer himself. And I'm absolutely amazed that nobody has tried to retcon it that it is Clyde Langer. Like, he got whisked up and dumped in a war with the Wirren, and then he went back to Bannerman Road. And come on, Big Finish, you can do that one. No, don't.
I haven't heard Rani takes on the world, so it is entirely possible that we've just spoiled that for everyone.
Yeah. Oh no, that is what happens in Riley Takes on the World. Like, seeing as you've not heard it, let's spoil it for you entirely.
Yeah.
So yeah, yeah, it's Riley's barely in it. It's actually mostly about Clyde sort of dealing with Wirren Dawn PTSD. No, I'm talking crap now. But yeah, no, this is cool. This is really good. This is one of those sort of it's kind of a mini subgenre of story that Big Finish does quite well. It's we've lost the TARDIS and we're in a war zone, which kind of harks back to Hartnell historicals, but I think Big Finish kind of do it on a much bigger and intense scale. Yeah, we've lost the TARDIS, we're in a war zone, all hope is lost. Let's learn a little bit about the Wirren. And I think there was at least a Wirren book, but I think this is, apart from that, probably the first time the Wirren have turned up in Doctor Who at all since the Ark in Space. And they're an interesting species. They're an interesting idea. Like, you have to remember that there's a very, very big and popular Hollywood franchise that totally rips off the Wirren. Like, come on, tell me Ridley Scott had not seen the Ark in Space when he made Alien.
It has been said.
Alien is basically a remake of the Ark in Space. Um, so yeah, um, I think this is a good one, and I think that while so we had Hot House. I think this is a reasonable comparison. Okay, we're bringing back a Tom Baker era villain that hasn't been done since. So I'm assuming that Crinoids and Wirren are a reasonable comparison here. So whereas Hot House kind of it did the Seeds of Doom, but what if the Seeds of Doom was 40, 50 years later? And it did it well, but let's be honest, with the exception of added bits of body horror and some mad scientistness, it was basically the Seeds of Doom. Whereas this is not doing the arc in space at all. This is kind of the aliens to the arc in space's Alien.
Oh,
And
I was going to say that. Oh,
oh, sorry. Do you want me to edit
you.
that out so you can
No,
say
I'll
it?
just say it anyway and hope that people
Yeah,
weren't listening. Um,
yeah, okay. Yeah, with any luck, people don't listen to me; they're just listening to you.
yeah,
Well,
that's what
before I
I.
steal any more of your lines, I'm going to shut up and let you talk about We're in Dawn then.
Yeah, so We're in Dawn. Really, you could say that it's sort of the aliens to the Ark in Space's Alien. I think that's fair. I haven't actually
Brilliant
seen
that.
Alien.
Absolutely
Yeah,
bloody brilliant
thank
that.
you very.
Yeah,
That's what you bring
fantastic.
me on for.
Yeah, yeah.
I haven't actually
This is
seen
why you're
Alien
here.
or Aliens, so I'm really, just blagging it at this point. But yeah, we do get this more sort of militaristic society and things like this. Obviously, we get the return of the Wirren. Between the Krynoid and the Wirren, they seem to have decided to go for bringing back specifically aliens that people always mispronounce the names of, which is, I guess, an interesting hook. Then again, I think people do tend to get the Metebelis spiders correct, so maybe not.
Everybody except Matt Smith.
Yes, that's true actually. Yeah. I liked We're Dawn. I like that you get this basis of this very sort of action heavy story, but actually you've got this idea of building this world of how do the Wirren function, and just sort of exploring at least a little bit this idea of a period in human history where that was extremely militaristic and extremely sort of gung ho and things like that, which is there's some interesting sort of ideas discussed there. Um, we again see sort of another instance of this more distant McGann, I felt at the end, when we have this almost converted Wirren, and he seems a little bit more distanced from the whole thing than you would maybe usually expect with a sort of a pre-Orbis performance where he's talking about this woman being converted into a Wirren and the Wirren life cycle and things like this. He seems to take a bit more of a step back from it than he would um, perhaps previously, which I think is an interesting point to make given where it is in the series. And yeah, there's a couple of other themes as well. You get obviously you've mentioned we get Clyde Langer in this, Daniel Anthony, and he portrays I guess they refer to them as an indig, but he has to struggle with that while also having a little bit perhaps of an internalized bias against the people who against his ancestors, and finding out that actually what he considered to be silly traditions did have a basis that people have now lost. I think there's some interesting stuff there. It perhaps doesn't quite have enough time to discuss it in that much detail, but it's definitely there. Um, and then there was one other part that I really liked. I think quite a small thing is the conversation Lucy has with a character whose name I have just forgotten. This always happens. One of the troopers, where they talk about perhaps just some stuff that might be coming up in the future, where Lucy's talking about that she still, she has a lot of trust for the Doctor, and they say, everyone lets you down sooner or later. I think it's sort of maybe sowing seeds of what's, coming for the Doctor and Lucy. I haven't actually heard Death in Blackpool, but I'm pretty sure something's going to happen in Death in Blackpool, given from the rest of Series 4, which I have heard. So it's interesting to see that sort of discussed a little bit here. And I think sort of between Briggs co-writing Orbis with Alan Barnes, and then him putting sort of lines like this in his own episode in We're in Dawn. It's a little bit of a showrunnery feel, because of course he's gonna end up in the end writing the overall finale for these 4 series, and so it's interesting him sort of dictating where we're going, as it were. It's it's an interesting thing to see. So yeah, overall, I quite liked We're in Dawn. Yeah, I thought it was a pretty good Doctor Who story.
And it is very much sort of the aliens to the arc in space is Alien, isn't it? When you think
That's
about
that's
it.
that's a great idea actually. Yeah,
Yeah.
I hadn't
Like,
thought
how
of
have we
that.
not come up with that before?
No, yeah. In fact, we should just keep
I know.
saying that all the time.
Yeah, we
Next time we do the
probably
book
should.
club, just mention it.
Yeah, yeah, totally. In fact, one of us should do Ark in Space for book club just to listen
Yeah,
to Connor rage.
yeah. Just start bringing up We're at Dawn,
Yeah.
which sadly doesn't have a novelization, although they do those now. So maybe at some point we will get one, and they can put our
Yes.
quote on the front. This is very much the aliens to the Ark in Space is Alien.
Yeah. Genius, that. Absolute genius. Um, okay, well, the next one is The Scapegoat. And if you cast your mind back to Series 2, I really, really liked the Pat Mills story. I really liked Dead London. I thought it was what if a Doctor Who comic was done as a Doctor Who audio. It was a very sort of, I guess it'd be a fairly mainstream comic, wouldn't it? Dead London. It would be, the kind of comic that maybe's well known and well celebrated. The Scapegoat, it's definitely another what if a comic was on audio, but it's a weird comic, isn't it? It's a bit of a nichey one. I like what it does. Like, you've got that real sort of mashup of styles that you do get in graphic novels. We have anthropomorphic goats and Nazis, which is just that's bonkers even by Doctor Who standards. But it something works about it. Like it's the mashup of styles works, and it's this very sort of twisted and bizarre world that's created. Yeah, we've got another Sarah Jane Adventures star in this one. We've got Samantha Bond, who turns up. We've also got Christopher Fairbank in it, who I really like as an actor, and sort of casting him as a goat is just perfect. Like, that's a really cracking bit of casting. As a story, it works. It does what it does. It's not one that sets my world on fire, but I like the weirdness, and I just like the kind of what the hell ever just listen to ness of it. It's delightfully weird, and it's memorable because it's weird, even if it's not the most sort of gripping and engaging Doctor Who story that there's ever been. What are your thoughts on it?
I found myself really liking this one actually. Yeah, I thought in fact it might be my favorite of the series. I didn't actually know because a lot of them I think are at quite a similar level for me, but this one might be my favorite, which I don't think is a very common opinion. But yeah, I just found myself really sort of enjoying the feel of this episode. Um, you get this sort of, I think it nails the sort of the atmosphere and the aesthetic that it's going for of this sort of occupied France location, sort of feels of a sort of like cabaret kind of thing. And as you say, it's just so weird. And quite interestingly, um, the the issue suggested is relatively small scale. Like there's no like the universe isn't in danger or the planet's not in danger and things like that. And it's fairly light on plot, but I actually think that works to its advantage. So I think that gives it more time to just sort of really delve into this world and the sort of all the various sort of intricacies and eccentricities that we see on display throughout this story. We haven't actually so far talked much about Sheridan Smith. She's, I guess, because really by this point she's really an established member of the cast. She's having great fun here, especially in the where she has to do the play. That's I think she's having a wonderful time there, and I think it's a pretty fun exploration into like the Grand Guignol and things like that. And so yeah, I just felt that the overall I just really liked the feel of this story, and which was quite nice because I know I didn't dislike Dead London at all, but I think you were slightly higher on Dead London as that with that one, whereas so coming back to Pat Mills with this, it was really nice, to really enjoy this story. And finally, I guess the only thing else I would say is that it's kind of the Alien 3 to no, I'm joking. That's it.
Alas, it's not Alien 3.
No, no,
Um,
it is.
I'm,
It's not
I'm,
Alien
I'm trying to
3.
work out what is the Alien 3. I don't think it's been made yet.
Oh, but it will
Um,
be.
but do you know who's in Alien 3?
No.
Paul McGann.
Oh, I feel
So
like I should have known
maybe it is.
that.
Maybe it is the Alien 3. I don't know. I really don't know where I'm going with this. But Paul McGann is in Alien 3. Um, so, yeah, it's... I don't know. I don't know why this one doesn't stand out to me a little bit more. It's... I make no secret of the fact that I'm not a big fan of comics, graphic novels, and so on. And I think maybe this one does just sort of cross the line a little bit for me in terms of graphic novel style weirdness. But it's definitely one that has come from that background. Sort of, we know where Pat Mills comes from. We know what Pat Mills' sort of strengths are and big successes are, and he's definitely playing to those here. Next one, then. Next one is the loud one. The first thing I think of, the first thing I think of when I think of the cannibalists is just how flipping noisy Phil Jupitus is. Like, I love the fact that Phil Jupitus is in a Doctor Who. That's wonderful. Um, we've got Phil Davis in this one as well, another sort of loud and powerful voice. But yeah, this is the shouty robot one, isn't it? And that's my main takeaway from this one. It's the one about the shouty robots. I love the cover of this one. Like, this is sort of one of those weird and wonderful Doctor Who covers from Big Finish where you kind of go, okay, this one looks interesting. Um, I think the big problem that this one suffers from is that it is the one before the finale. And at this point, I'm just kind of like, you know what? I'm ready for the spiders now. Bring out the spiders. It just kind of gets lost. It's not particularly significant. It doesn't have any major ongoing story arc kind of moments. It is just the one with the shouty robots. It's a cool idea. I like sort of what it does, and robot society breakdown has been done many times in Doctor Who before, and has been done again many times since. And I don't think this is a particularly sort of incredible example of the genre. It is, again, just another one of those Doctor Who stories that does Doctor Who, and there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with it. There's nothing bad about it. But I think it just sort of, within the context of this series, pales into insignificance a little bit. Maybe you like it more than I do. What do you think?
So, first off, I do also quite like the cover. I think it's just quite a nice cover. Just a bit different to a lot of the other ones. So just a small point there. One thing that immediately struck me about the episode, and this is immediate because it basically happens right at the beginning. There's a thing in sort of children's animation where there are all sorts of rules about, how much violence you can portray against characters, but those rules are more lax against a robot. So it used to be that they would use a lot of robots in, kids cartoons, and then they could just be as violent as they wanted because it was a robot. And it kind of follows here. It feels like Johnny Morris has kind of done the same with the cannibalists, because the cold open where, that robot gets ambushed and gets slowly taken apart while it's still conscious and things like that, genuinely quite distressing. It was quite surprising to hear um, something like that in, by 2009. Big Finish was known for being slightly, less violent than it had been at its start, but by through the medium of robots they can sort of recapture some of that early sort of wilderness years feel that they had. On the point of the wider story, certainly, it is very much the shouted robot story, death metal, etc., etc. um I enjoyed it. I thought it was a pretty good Doctor Who story, but I do wonder if another thing here is on your point. If another point here is that it feels a little bit perhaps in this series that there's been slightly less variety. if that makes sense. So we've had because we've had this series link of a slightly darker feel through them all. It's meant that we haven't had more of a like a rompy story. We do get the scapegoat, which is a bit more certainly strange than the rest of them. But I do wonder if the fact that they're all sort of quite dark and relatively violent, with those sort of the horror themes often cropping up, if by episode 6 you start feeling that a little bit, that you've heard quite a lot of that, that might be a point that I'd make really about the whole series. But for this episode specifically, yeah, I think it's a pretty good Doctor Who story. I think of uh, Johnny Morris's 2 episodes that he's done, I think I slightly preferred Hothouse, but overall, I think this is worth a listen.
Yeah, it's as I said, it's entirely harmless. It's not a bad story, but I think being a good story, as I've said already, is not good enough in these Eighth Doctor adventures. Um, it is the shouty robot one. I'm sorry, I'm never going to get past it. I am never going to get past the shouty robots. um, shall we shift on to the finale then? So this is the Eight Truths and World Wide Web. We'll do them as one. It's a four-parter, isn't it? Let's not mess about. There isn't even the sort of divide that the Morbius story has. The Morbius story is almost like a three-parter and a one-parter in some ways, but this is very much a four-parter. There is that sort of gap in the middle, bit of a time jump, but nothing worth getting too excited about. Okay, so this is the big headhunter story. This is the conclusion of that storyline, and it just has some absolutely brilliant moments with the headhunter in it. Like she's back into kind of evil mode. She has a plan, and we get Karen back as well, and I like kind of what this does. It's using those characters differently. Again, we've had them in the sort of spacey Cyberman office setting. We've had them in the Grand Theft Cosmos setting, and this one, it's is it modern day or the not too distant future? This one, I think it's the not too
Is it
distant
is it the not
future, isn't it?
is it like 2015 or something? Which of course back then
Yeah,
would have been the not too distant future. It's something like
yeah.
that.
Oh, it is. It's 2015. Yes, yeah. So it's kind of X-Men in a few years' time type thing. Um, and it sort of plays with the idea of, sort of new age cults and all that kind of thing, which Doctor Who always does well, I think. I think Torchwood's done it quite well very often as well. But it just seems to be something that Big Finish are quite good at latching onto, and Big Finish love a good crowd, don't they? They love a big mob. And this definitely features those. Um, the big note of this one is it's not even what the eight legs are up to. Like again, we're bringing back an interesting and otherwise unexplored beyond their original story villain here. It's the third time this series. I don't think the eight legs have been back since at all, have they? Which kind of surprises me. We've
I
had
can't
giant
think of
spiders,
one.
but
Yeah, I
um,
can't think of them being back.
like we had arachnids in the UK on telly, but that is not the eight legs. Um, it's kind of a shame because I think the eight legs are a really interesting an idea. Like, what if spiders developed all of those powers and did all of that? And I refuse to believe that the third Doctor wiped them all out in Planet of the Spiders. In fact, there's a lot of evidence here that he didn't, considering they're in this story. Um, but yeah, they're pretty good. They're good. They're good villains. They're a good idea. And I'm genuinely surprised that we haven't actually seen more of them, or they haven't been explored in different ways. Because one thing that this doesn't do, which Wirren Dawn did do, is kind of explore the characters a little bit further, like explore the species and actually how the spiders work and what they do. Planet of the Spiders doesn't do it so much. Planet of the Spiders just has them ruling over one planet and wanting to have a crack at late 70s or is it 80s ha ha Earth. But yeah, this one kind of the kind of villain of the week in it, aren't they? Because really, what's going on is we're solving the headhunter storyline, and I think the headhunter's exit's really good. I think it's really, really well done. It's unfortunately this is one of those stories that the best bit's the end, and that's a shame because it is a good story, and I feel as though I'm not quite doing it justice by jumping to the end here. But we say goodbye to the headhunter. She redeems herself. She kind of sacrifices herself to defeat the spiders and save the day. And we just have that wonderful, wonderful moment at the end where, despite the fact that the Doctor has spent quite a bit of time with her, has being connected with her for 3 series worth of adventures, and Lucy's the same. There's just that wonderful line about we never knew her name. The Doctor says, "I never knew her name," but we, as the audience as well, we care when this character dies. It actually matters to us, and we never knew her name. Yeah, fantastically done. So yeah, it's another 2-part finale. I don't think it's anywhere near as good as the Morbius one we got in year 2, but I like what it does. Like, Eight Legs and Modern Day Earth works. It's kind of doing what High House did, I guess. Um, it works. It works really well. It's a good story. What do you think?
Yeah, so we get another epic finale here with the eight legs, as you said, the spiders, as they don't like to be called. Yeah, you did mention they don't really flesh out the spiders that much. They do mention that they are Earth spiders, unless I've made that up, isn't there? There's like the Doctor makes a quick point of like they were Earth spiders that were brought in on a ship or something, and then they mutated because of the Metabolist crystals or something,
Yes,
which is an interesting.
they went in the spaceship to Metabit. I think it is in Planet of the Spiders. I think it is
Oh, is that in
mentioned.
Planet of the Spiders?
I
Yeah, that was
think
one thing
so.
I
Yeah.
was wondering, like, is that in like the novelization or is it in the episode? And I've forgotten because I was like, oh, that's
I,
a
I'm
an
fairly sure
interesting.
there's a the bit in the middle of Planet of the Spiders where the whole thing just stops dead and the Doctor's unconscious.
Yeah,
I
just about. Yeah.
think there is a conversation um, about how the spiders travelled in the human spaceship to Metabolist 3 and ended up getting enhanced by the crystals. I think,
Uh, yeah.
or
This
maybe
vaguely
I'm
rings a
just
bell.
injecting that in to make the 4th episode of Planet of the Spiders, where absolutely nothing happens, more exciting. Who knows? No, it is in
So
there. It is
it's
there.
just right. It's in my memories now. I can now picture John Pertwee saying it. So whether or not it happened, it doesn't really matter. But yeah, I think they're a good choice for the story being told here because Eddie Robson is discussing cults here, and there is a mix this link between the spiders and spiritualism that we see in Planet of the Spiders. Sadly, unlike Planet of the Spiders, there is not a 12-minute long chase scene in this, entirely on audio, which would have been an interesting endeavor. The the story itself, I think, when it one interesting part of this is when it talks about when Lucy first starts speaking to the cult, and it sort of goes through the sort of the methods that these cults use to try and indoctrinate people. I think that's an interesting part of the episode where we see that process through with Lucy. Obviously, in the case of Lucy, she's got a crystal that's bending her mind and things like that. But it is interesting to see those aspects being portrayed, and that's quite a nice, quite a good part of part one. Um, we also get this side of we get to see the cult leader who has essentially just made all of this up, as far as he knew, suddenly come to the realization that his cult was actually a real thing, and have to sort of face that, which is quite an interesting aspect of the episode as well. We get Karen back. I like Karen, and of course we get the headhunter. I'll speak about the headhunter more in a second as well as a sort of I guess a sort of a substitute companion figure as well for a lot of this. Oh God, what's her name? I forgot. Hopefully this is ringing
Karen.
some bells for you. No, not Karen. The other one. The woman who was in the cult.
Oh, Drat.
Yeah, I've drawn a blank as well, which I said, I think she's really good at it, but I've obviously drawn a blank on what the character's name is. It's interesting to see that because, of course, we will see.
Is it the journalist character, do you mean?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah,
Yeah. Let's just go with the journalist character.
the journalist character. Yeah,
Yeah.
but it's interesting because, of course, spoilers before this whole series is out, we are going to see another Eighth Doctor companion. It is interesting to see that sort of that dynamic a bit here as well. Um, so yes, the headhunter. Obviously, this is a very big episode for her. I knew that something was going to happen to the headhunter because, as I said, I've heard series four, and she is noticeably absent for being such a long running part of the series. And yeah, there is a nice little sort of goodbye section, I guess. She gets to do some full on villaining. We do find out because in Orbis she appears to be seemingly on their side, but not really. And then we find out that she has been doing some villainous stuff in the background, and we see that come to fruition here. And I think Katarina Olsen's been great throughout. And yeah, as you say, it is quite a touching moment at the end, where even if they are a villain, we spent so much time with them and things like that, and they've sort of been on either side at one point or another. And then this thing of like we never actually learned what their name was and things like that. It's I think it is quite nicely done. The one thing that I did mention earlier in when we were talking about Orbis, or just after perhaps, um, is that one of the main conflict here is that the Stellar Manipulator is back, that we first see in The Vengeance of Morbius, and then we see again in Orbis. And when the doctor sort of announces that, and he sort of says, "Oh, that's the Stellar Manipulator. I recognize it from a planet from across the other side of the universe, or the other side of the galaxy, or whatever." And he mentions it quite matter of factly, and I felt that there was some drama there that the story doesn't go into because, of course, it destroyed the planet that he called his home for 600 years, and it left him sort of a complete depressed mess who was willing to die on Orbis and things like that. And it felt when they mentioned that and when the Stellar Manipulator came back, I thought it was going to sort of tie off the Orbis stuff and have the Doctor really finally confront that. But it kind of doesn't. He just sort of mentions it quite offhandedly, and then it doesn't really come back up on that emotional level for the rest of the story. And I think I said before, you have to be careful talking about stuff that stories don't do. But I do see that as a little bit of a missed opportunity there. It's like I think there was an interesting thing to talk about that would have really tied the series up in a nice bow that they didn't go for.
That's it. As I said earlier, it as a storyline, it kind of fizzles out. This whole sort of moodier, darker, more distant Doctor that lived on Orbis for 600 years and witnessed the entire society being wiped out. There's no massive emotional gut punch here, where you're right, there probably should have been. But the thing is, as far as I'm aware, it never gets mentioned again. Like, Death in Blackpool kind of. I know you've not heard it, so I don't want to spoil anything, but Death in Blackpool very much does its own thing. Like, whatever happens in Death in Blackpool is not based around, oh, the Stellar Manipulator. It's not mentioned as far as I remember. And then obviously it doesn't pop up again in Series 4. So there's a sort of reset button here. And it's maybe that's the biggest problem I have with this series. It's that its ongoing arc, in the end, doesn't really matter. And by the end of it, we're just back to normal without any acknowledgement as to why. And I think maybe that's the reason that this series maybe doesn't quite do it for me in the way that the others do. Because I've enjoyed the individual stories, I've enjoyed the individual episodes. We're in Dawn is very much the aliens to the Ark in Space is Alien, but
I have heard that from somewhere. I don't know
yeah,
where.
yeah, yeah, I've definitely heard that before. But ultimately, when we get to the finale, it's really busy being a big epic finale again, and it does it well. It is a good big epic finale, and I think a very different big epic finale to a lot of the other stuff Big Finish do. But kind of sacrifices the emotional investment that has been put into the Doctor and Lucy. I love the dynamic of those two characters in this series, but it doesn't. There's no resolution, and that bothers me a little bit. And there isn't a resolution coming in Series 4. In fact, there isn't a mention of any of this at all in Series 4. We just kind of keep calm and carry on when we get to it, which is a bit of a shame, really, I think.
Yeah, I think I did feel that a bit with this series because having heard Series 4, I was aware that a lot of this stuff wasn't going to come up. Um, and so I do think that maybe there was a couple of missed opportunities there. Obviously, Series 4 has a lot to do, to the point
Yeah.
that it actually has 2 more episodes, and it does a lot with those. So I think some of the stuff from the previous series just ended up sort of left on the table, really. So yeah.
Series 4 does feel like a little bit of a retooling again. It feels like another little bit of a reset, but I think that's probably something to talk about next time we reconvene for an Eighth Doctor look. So that was Series 3. I did enjoy it. If you sort of asked me when I've not heard it for a while, I will turn around and go, not so keen on Series 3, but then I'll listen to it and I'll go, no, it has Orbis, it has Hot House, it has We're in Dawn, it does have the weirdness of the scapegoats, and it does have a really good finale. It doesn't have the amazing finale that Series 2 had, but it still has its own really good, strong finale. And if I had one wish for this series, if I could just sort of change one thing, it would be we just get one more Headhunter episode. One more episode with the Headhunter, one more example of the Stellar Manipulator popping up somewhere in the middle, just to remind us that this storyline's going on. And then at the end, maybe a little bit more of a resolution. I think that would just kind of iron out any of the problems that we've discussed. But ultimately, it's another winner. It's, the Eighth Doctor Adventures, all 4 series are absolutely fantastic. So yeah, we'll leave that one there then. But it's been good to do another series, and we've got one left, and as you mentioned, it's an extra long one. So sort of roll that on. I'm looking forward to getting to that. We get a new companion, we get some weird and wonderful, interesting stories again. We get an old companion as well. So there's an awful lot to look forward to. So yeah, roll on Series 4.
Yes, I'm looking forward to mostly revisiting it, although I haven't heard it's Death in Blackpool and Situation Vacant that I haven't heard, so that's going to be interesting to sort of go back to the beginning of the series and then follow on with the stuff that I have actually heard.
Oh, Situation Vacant's a lot of fun, so I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say about that one. But yes, that is for another Spodcast, and that is all for this podcast. So thank you very much for joining me again, Will, and goodbye.
Yes, lovely to be here again to discuss, and then see you in the next one. Ta-ra.
We'll be back for more Spodcasting soon. Goodbye now.